Today's talk title is Swimming in Life. Swimming. So I wanted to talk about that. I'm using that as my talk title because I wanted to talk about how we're really kind of like fish in the ocean most of the time when we don't realize that we're in the ocean that God is. And by that, what I mean is that that happens when we're out there and we're kind of living our lives and we see the other fish around us, but we don't really have knowingness that we're all connected, in that ocean that is God. But there is a way of living where we do get that connection, where we do understand that, where we do get a place in our lives of awe and wonder. And that, in order to have that, what we have to understand is that we are kind of swimming in life, that life that God is naturally what our environment is. And if we're going to be in that place of kind of awe and wonder, that's kind of the place that the mystics come from. So we could all be, kind of mystical from that standpoint. Now, being mystical is not really odd. Every one of the major religions has a mystical branch to it. Christianity has the Gnostics, and the Jewish religion has the Kabbalists. Islam has the Sufis, which I think we know a little bit more about because of Rumi and Hafiz, and I'm not sure, maybe even Kabir was Sufi. So there is this strong mystical influence throughout all the world's religions, but it's not necessarily what's taught every day. Now, the definition, if you're kind of wondering what the definition and the meaning of the word mystic is, I looked it up and I'm going to talk about two pieces of the meaning of mystic. The first one is a person who seeks by contemplation and self-surrender to obtain unity with or absorption into the deity or the absolute. So what that would mean is it's talking about contemplation and self-surrender. That would be where we would be going within and looking for presence that's inside of us, that contemplative process that we do in meditation, for instance. And then the second part of the definition is a person who believes in the spiritual apprehension of truths that are beyond that intellect, beyond the intellect. So it's beyond what I know. I can know spiritual truths. I can have spiritual truths kind of downloaded into me without somebody teaching me, right? And that would be our intuition. We'd be listening through that contemplation. We would get in touch with the divine and we would listen and we get kind of a download. Now, there are some people in history who've gotten major downloads in that way, right? They would be, they've started their own religion, their own world religion. Moses would be an example, Jesus for Christianity, Muhammad for Islam, Buddha for Buddhism. And you could even say that Ernest Holmes kind of falls in that camp of in his own way, he got kind of a download from God on things that he learned from other people, but then also I think he picked up pieces from his intuition also. So if we talk for a few moments about Ernest Holmes, our founder, the founder of religious science or science of mind, he did a lot of study before he got an introduction into mysticism, really. So his mysticism part came a little bit later after he'd already studied Emerson and he'd studied Troward. And Troward in particular gave him the understanding about the law, meaning what we call the law is the creative principle of God. So what Ernest was teaching about the law was that we can put into the law, put our thoughts in, and outpicture what we desire. And through that, we can end up with the life of our dreams, is how it's said sometimes. And that's a great thing. I mean, who doesn't want to have the life of your dreams? Who doesn't want to live a happy life and feel fulfilled in the way that your life is showing up in your work and at your home and at your church and all the relationships that you have? That's a wonderful thing. But then by going into the mystical part, which he learned through a woman named Emma Curtis Hopkins, who, if you've read her books, she's kind of mystical through and through. She's not a little bit mystical, she's a lot mystical. And she's known as the teacher of teachers because she taught many of the people who ended up being kind of founders of the New Thought religions. So that would be Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, for instance, for unity. And she taught, I forgot the name of the two women, but the two sisters who started Divine Sciences, which is another New Thought movement. And then she taught Ernest Holmes. And Ernest Holmes came to her fairly late in her life. She was already 80 years old by the time she started teaching him, and he was one of her last students. And so maybe, she saved the best for last. Maybe I don't know, but she definitely taught him the mystical aspect that he ended up teaching later on. And so I was reading in the Science of Mind archives on their website. They had a little article about Ernest, and they were talking about his mystical aspects and his learning from Emma Curtis Hopkins. And they said he now clearly could teach, after this time with Emma Curtis Hopkins, he now could clearly teach the distinctions between mental science, which emphasized the psychological, they're talking about the law there, right, that creative principle, and spiritual science that relied on the spiritual and the mystical. So while some of his writings, in fact, a lot of his writings are actually about the law, he does have some really sweet writings, especially in his later books, that are very mystical in nature. And when he's writing about that, it's got that feeling of a connection to God, which is what a mystic is trying to do, is trying to have a direct connection to God. And it's kind of in that way of be still and know. And he comes through very clearly with a realization of what I would call the inner presence. Now, Ernest and his brother Fenwick, the last book that Ernest wrote is called The Voice Celestial. I don't know if you guys have heard about that one, but The Voice Celestial is really an epic poem. It's a book-length poem, and it's all in prose, and it's a story of the farer, who is this person who's looking for answers. And then there's another presence in the book, another character in the book or in the poem is the presence, which is the God answering back to him. And so in The Voice Celestial, there's a quote I'd like to give you from The Presence, talking about kind of the mystical aspect of us. And it says, "Be patient then, I come with this design. To wake thy master self, the power is thine. In you, the substance of a greater man. In you, the purpose of a cosmic plan. In you, the vision of a central flame, the voice of truth that calls you by your name." So what he's saying there is that within us, already there, is this master self. And it's already here, and what we need to do is we need to wake it up if we want to connect with the presence, if we want to be that mystical essence, we just need to wake up our master self, because that's the part of our soul, that's the soul that lives down deep inside of us, that connects one-to-one with God. There is no separation there. And so I was thinking, well, it's kind of interesting, these mystical experiences that people can have. And so I was kind of combing through the internet and looking through some books and looking to see some stories of people who have had mystical experiences. And I kind of got a little bit of goosebumps when I was reading this one. So I'm going to read it. It's kind of a story. And it's from an anonymous man. It didn't have his name on it, but it's from a website, progressivechristianity.org. And the man says, "A few years back, I got brutally honest with God and myself and told God I didn't think God existed anymore. I won't go into all my reasons for it, but I just doubted whether or not God was real. But contrary to what I expected, I didn't feel a sense of rejection or abandonment at that point. Instead, I felt a huge sense of relief. And then I felt an overwhelming sense of acceptance, like I was okay. I had committed blasphemy, but I was feeling this buoyancy around me, like I was a tiny leaf floating on a huge ocean. I suspected this might be, maybe, God, but had no way to know for sure. But true to form, I couldn't keep my mouth shut, so I let God have it. I informed him of all my problems with the Bible, all my problems with Christianity and Christians, all my problems with doctrine. I figured he already knew all the problems with me. And I waited for the ocean to dissipate and for fire to set in. It didn't. Instead, I continued to have this feeling that I was accepted just as I am. But I wasn't even pleading that Jesus died for me. I was just there, my soul naked before what I called reality, and this God was okay with me. For the first time in my life, I didn't just believe that God was love, I felt it. It wasn't a doctrine, it was an experience. It was beyond reason, but it was not contrary to it. So what he's talking about is he's having what we would call a mystical experience. An experience where you can feel the divine around you. And I think the common thing that I've read and that I've felt about mystical experiences is that you do feel as if everything is all right, that God is perfectly happy with you, just the way you are. And so I'd like to just tell you a little bit about my skinny dipping in life. Sorta, not quite. Close, but not quite there. I used to do a lot of scuba diving for many, many years. I did scuba diving. I've scuba dived in a lot of places in the world. And I started out here in California. I was scuba diving. I joined a scuba club that was just getting formed, and we formed up by having a scuba lesson, a class, and Buck was our teacher, and he took us through our paces, and we dived, for the scuba certification. We did some dives here in California, off the coast. There was a couple of ocean dives, beach dives, and then we did a Catalina dive. And the thing there's beautiful diving here in California, but the water's cold. It is. It's cold. And we were diving actually in I think it was in March, so it was actually pretty darn cold. And you have to wear dive suits that are really constrictive. You feel like you're being just kind of, pulled together. And so while you're in this water, and there's all this beauty around you, around me, I always felt like I was kind of somehow separated from it. And so then, after getting certified, we immediately went off to Cozumel in Mexico off the Yucatan Peninsula. And the diving there is spectacular. They have what's called drift diving. And they put you in, and you just kind of float with the current, because there's a pretty good current going between the island and the mainland. And you just float with the current, and you go whisking by all of this stuff. And it was my first warm water dive, and so I decided I was going to get rid of the wetsuit. And so I didn't have a wetsuit. I did have clothes on, but I didn't have a wetsuit. And I felt really free in the water. Now, the dive guide, there were 2 dive guides, and they split us up between people who wanted to go through this cave and people who didn't. He warned us it would be a little claustrophobic. And by God, it was a little claustrophobic. So we're going down. We got into the cave at about 40 feet, and we're going through the cave, and there were places where you couldn't get through the cave going like this. You would have to like turn and get through it. And I was really happy to get to the other side, actually, by the time we got through. And the first thing that I realized was that I was just kind of hanging there, suspended, looking out, because I had just come out from the wall of the opening in the cave, and I was looking out on what we call the Big Blue, which is just the deep water ocean. And visibility is whatever it is when you're doing that, 100 feet, 200 feet, whatever, depending on how clear the water is. And so you can kind of see these fish swimming out there. And every once in a while, one comes close enough you can actually see what it is. But generally, you've just got this impression, or I had this impression of just this blue expanse, and I was a part of it, and I could see these other things. But then I turned around, and there I was. I first realized, I looked at my depth gauge, and I saw that I was about 100 feet, so I was as I was turning around, I was going up because that was a little deep. And but then I turned, and I saw the coral wall that had been behind me. And now I'm up close and personal with this teeming life that's just everywhere. It's coral and fish and little fish swimming, and there's so much more life there on the coral reef than there is in California. California is beautiful, but the coral reefs are they're just stuffed comparatively with life. And that juxtaposition of behind me, the Big Blue, and in front of me, the teeming life of coral, was a mystical experience for me. And so, that's a way, nature is a way that kind of connects us sometimes to the mystical experience if we're willing to open ourselves up. And I have to say that at that time, I recognized this feeling, but I didn't really equate it to God as I would today. Now, as I remember back, I understand more of what I was feeling. And so I think that we get to have this opportunity, whether it's in nature or in our lives, and maybe in church. I've had them in prayer at church. We get to have that experience of an intimate connection with the divine. And it starts with, I think, with awe and with wonder. And so I want to leave you with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. He says, "In the end, it's not the years in your life that count, it's the life in your years." And what I think, personally, that I think he's pointing to is I think he's pointing to life with a capital L, the life in your years. And so if we want to imbue our years with life, with a capital L, then I think what we want to do is turn within and speak to that presence that's always there. Thank you. Namaste. So why don't we just go within? I allow myself to fall down, fall back. I allow myself to drop, knowing that I'm infinitely safe in that dropping. But I drop down inside of myself to that place within me that knows the life and the power and the presence that God is so intimately, so beautifully, so lovingly. And as I drop into that place of knowingness, I just know that essence, that power, that presence which permeates all of the universe, which is all of the universe, and yet which is so much more. I know that life, that power, that presence is God. I know it as love and peace and joy. I know it as all these qualities that we ascribe to it, knowing that it creates out of those qualities into our lives, into all that we see and we feel and we touch. And as that's true of God, I know it to be the truth of each and every one of us. And so we are absolutely blessed as that life that God is, as the love and the peace and the joy that God is. That's the truth of us at the very core of our beingness. And so as we have gathered together tonight, we recognize together that life, that power, moving in as and through our lives, blessing us in all the ways that it does, moving as love in all of the relationships that we have, both between each of us and beyond, in the relationships beyond what we bring with us today. Those personal relationships, the work relationships, neighborly relationships. The love that God is living there, is creating there, is being there. And I know absolutely that the peace that God is, it permeates our being, it fills us with a stillness. It brings safety, brings quiet to our souls. And I know in that life that God is, as we swim in life itself, that we are truly, truly blessed. And I just release this prayer into the law, knowing that it's already fulfilled in the mind that God is, and I say life and God are good and very good. And together we say, and so it is.